The violence in the region is now spiraling, with Hamas having responded to the Israeli assault with rocket fire, killing at least 3 Israelis. Now let's speak to Paul Hirshon, a spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry in Tel Aviv. Welcome to the program today, sir. Thank you for coming on. Indeed, the latest reports we have suggesting that Israeli IDF forces are getting armoured vehicles together. They're making their way towards the Gaza Strip area. Troops are also being brought in. I understand, according to the Times of Israel, the IDF is calling up reserves ahead of a possible ground offensive. Is that what's next to be expected here?
Well, I believe that you've presented it correctly. I don't know that it will develop into a ground offensive over the next coming hours.
Now, the strikes being carried out, though, are said to be targeting militants, but in fact we are seeing a lot of civilians being killed and injured at this point, including children. Do you think this kind of heavy-handed response can be justified?
Well, you know, it's interesting you say a heavy-handed response. Earlier you mentioned battered and barraged and bombarded. The truth of the matter is, I think, and I think you would agree with me, this has been so far one of the most surgical pinpoint military operations in modern military history. I think again you will see that the civilian to militant casualty ratio will show up Israel to have unfortunately killed civilians, but far fewer than any other comparable military
Mr. Hirshon, I'm sorry to jump in, but you call this a pinpoint operation. You call this one of the most precise and exact and pinpoint military operations that Israel's known in recent history, and that can allow for what you might consider collateral damage, the killing of children.
Well, you know, of course, I mean, when you present it and you talk about civilians, it's always sad, as are the Israeli civilians who've been killed just today, the 3 Israelis who were killed. But of the 11 Palestinians who were killed, 7 are confirmed militants, to use a light word.
All right, now, I suppose one question I should ask you is, I mean, are you worried, though, that possibly you're just giving rise to anti-Israeli attitudes among Palestinians? Let's have a listen to this quickly. It's the Hamas leader that we spoke to just a bit earlier. Please stand by.
The assassination of this great leader, Ahmed al-Jabari, clearly confirms that we are still in the heart of resistance with the Israeli enemy. The Zionist enemy knows nothing but the language of killing and blood. Our battle with the enemy is an open battle. God willing, this battle will end with Palestine and Jerusalem liberated. They should wait for our action, not words.
Now, Mr. Hirshon, as we heard right there, aren't you worried your government is possibly just pushing them towards more violence? Is it some sort of provocation that justifies an ends to the mean?
I think the provocation is the over 800 missiles that have been fired indiscriminately into Israeli civilian areas during the course of this year, over 200 of which in the last 10 days. When the previous speaker said we should wait for their actions and not their words, we've seen their actions, a situation which no sovereign anywhere in the world could accept. What would you do were just one missile to land in central Moscow?
Well, you talk about missiles. I mean, let's clarify here. We're talking about mortar rockets that are being trajected over. Some might say that a mortar rocket from the Palestinian militants compared to your Hellfire and Sidewinder missiles from your super high-tech fighter jets, well, there's quite a big difference between fireworks and bombs.
Well, I mean, that is like you're saying that if Israel were to play Brazil at soccer and lose 12-0, and then we complain that they used their best players. I mean, that's a little bit off focus. But the truth of the matter is that we have a situation where just today 3 Israeli civilians were killed. Call them mortars, call them missiles. Those are dead civilians. We have a situation where in the recent past, some 30% of the Israeli children in southern Israel were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Tell me one country which can accept a situation like that.
Tell you one country that can accept a situation of a child suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder.
30% of the children in southern Israel.
Well, I think
as a result of the behavior of Hamas.
I think if we look at certain Western military campaigns all over the Middle East region, I think you'll be finding there's an awful large percentage of children with post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's not focus right now on America's campaign in your region, but let's discuss this quickly, if I may. I understand you are a PR man. You have a job to do. You have certain things to say. But what are you really hoping to achieve with this offensive that's ongoing? How is it going to differ from the 2008 conflict, for which Israel was heavily criticized by the world community?
Israel was heavily criticized by a part of the world community. I agree with you there. I remind you and I point out that that was 4 years ago the lowest civilian to militant casualty rate in history. 29% of those killed were civilians, and I'm not belittling the death of any civilians, but far lower than any other military campaign in the last century. I think that we will see something similar this time. You ask me, what are we hoping to achieve? We're hoping to achieve a number of things. First and foremost, to significantly degrade the command and control and operational abilities of Hamas, a terror organization recognized as a terror organization not only by us, by the European Union, by the Americans, by others around the world, a vile organization which is at civil war with its own people, having thrown out their own elected leadership in the Palestinian Authority. And in addition, we're hoping to bring and planning to bring quiet to the civilians, the Israeli civilians living in southern Israel.
What about, I suppose, let's take a step back and look at the regional implications and the fact of isolation. You have Lebanon in the north, Syria in the west, now Egypt as well, who's trying to mediate all this. In fact, the Egyptian foreign minister was on the phone to U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton earlier today, calling for, quote-unquote, immediate U.S. intervention to put down Israel's aggression. Is that a bit of a turning of the tide there to see such a statement for going to Washington in reference to what's going on the Gaza Strip?
No, I don't think that's a great surprise. Look, we have a relationship with Egypt. We speak to them and they say to us directly similar things. And to be expected, nobody wants this to degenerate to the point that it's got to today. Nobody wanted this. We've been saying, and we continue to say, for the last 4 years to the Palestinians, to the Palestinian Authority, come back to the negotiating table. All of the issues on the table, every single one, will resolve this. It'll be difficult, but we'll resolve this. And we'll do so because it's in our mutual interest.
All right, Paul Hirshon, a spokesman for the Israeli Foreign Ministry in Tel Aviv. I wish we had more time for this. We don't. But thank you very much indeed for coming on the RT programme today.
Thank you.